I'm Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Joseph Oniwor, who was a pro arena football player that turned breakthrough transformational trainer that has been in the fitness industry for 28 years. Currently, he is focusing on helping others regain confidence within themselves and pursue their dreams. Joe is a firm believer that if you incorporate mindfulness, holistic lifestyle changes, and a healthy workout regimen into your life, your passion will become a reality. In this discussion, Joseph shares his beginnings of living in a single-parent household and how that has affected his internal beliefs about himself, and that he was eventually able to conquer those beliefs to achieve his success. He shares how the mindset practices he developed over time allowed him to turn his life around and now help others as well. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And today I'm with Joseph Oniwor. And Joseph, you want to just give us a little background on yourself?
Yes, I'm super grateful to be here today, Amy. My name is Coach Joe. Well, everybody called me Coach Joe in my world. Joseph Oniwor. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I'm currently living in Shelton, Connecticut. My journey has been all in the sports world. I'm now a transformational trainer. Through that, I've been a professional NFL arena football player, Division I football player as well. That led me through that arena. And so a lot of the leadership skills, the growth opportunities I have all come by way of exertion. I always like to say.
Exertion. Oh,
exertion.
Okay.
Exert effort to learn about yourself.
Right.
And so it's been a great journey. I've lost 110 pounds on my transformational journey in terms of on the physical side. And through that, the mindfulness and the mindset has been the big catalyst, the key, and really the difference maker in my life then to now.
Okay, well, great. So we just love to get into the backgrounds of my guests and really try to understand where you came from, what the belief systems you had as you grew up. So maybe you can start with, where did you grow up? What did your parents do? That sort of thing, brothers and sisters.
Yes. So my background, coming from Los Angeles, California, the first beginning years of my life, I was raised in Compton area, Carson area of Los Angeles. And so the really foundation, I come from a single parent household. My mother and my father split right before I was actually born. And so my dad was around till I was about 6 years old. I was one of three at that time, the baby. And so my grandparents definitely played a big key in supporting my mom in terms of, raising the three of us with time and things like that. But by the time I was 5 years old, we moved away from my grandparents. And so it was really a house of four. And so also, I think a big foundation or a big thing that blueprint that started to frame at that age is I was the youngest of three, but I was the only male in the house. So it was the, you're the man of the house type thing, and I didn't realize how much that played into, creating a blueprint for myself throughout my life. But it was a big key in the foundation of not having a man around. And all of the limiting beliefs that I developed about myself from that, which is key, along with the responsibility and things on the other side of being the only male in the house and, having that great opportunity, I like to put it, as a young person to define life from that aspect when you don't have any guidance.
Right. So what kind of job did your mom have? Like, how was she supporting you?
Yes, so my mom has been an RN since the time I was born. So I think
Okay.
she became a RN when by the time she had the three of us, I believe my mom was 23 at that time.
Okay.
And she has been in the nursing field her whole stint. So she's always been an RN as far as I remember in that professional side.
So so what was the age difference between your sisters and you?
Ah, great. So my oldest sister Essie is
Yeah.
4 years older than me. My oldest sister Aname, and my father is from Nigerian, so those names are of Nigerian
Okay.
descent. And so my Aname is 2 years older than me, and then it
Okay.
was me.
And now, were your parents from the US, or are they?
My mother's from the U.S. My father's from Nigeria, Lagos.
Okay. So he had grown up there, and how did he come into the US? Do you know?
Yes, so my father has such a great story. He actually stowed away on a U.S. warship
Oh,
when
wow.
he was 19, and that got him over to London. And then he was over in London for a couple years, trying to get his visa over to the U.S., which he eventually got after about 2 years. And that's
Wow.
how he came over. Yeah, he was pretty exceptional in his vision. He used to stand on the beaches of Lagos and say, "One day I'm gonna come to America." Since he was a little boy, and he eventually made that happen. Very
Wow.
crafty, wise man in that aspect.
Right. So did you stay in touch with him, or did you not see him since you were 6?
So since he was in and out until I was 6, and then I didn't see him again until I was 16.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a knock at the door one day, and that whole and knocking at the door, your life changes. It was that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, okay. So until you're 16, you haven't really had an example of a father in the house, and you're being told to be the man of the house. So where did you take examples from?
My grandfather and my uncle were the
Okay.
two male figures. My grandfather was the leader of the family in terms of that role, very strong. He was a pastor, hard worker. And so he was that. And then my uncle, I have three older uncles, and the youngest one, my uncle Paul he was like more of a big brother, but definitely he was what I framed my life of what a strong male looked like. He was kind of like my idol growing up.
And what about him, like, made him a strong male example to you?
He was cool. My uncle, he was the cool guy. He was closer in age to me, and all of my uncles, my uncle Timothy, and my uncle Raymond, who unfortunately passed away when I was really young. He was murdered in
Oh,
Los
wow.
Angeles. Yeah, and so I didn't really get to know my uncle Raymond, but my uncle Tim went away to the Navy, so he wasn't around that much because he was away serving on duty. But then my uncle Paul was around, and when I was at my grandma, he was there, and he was just he was a cool guy, strong, great athlete. So he's somebody I always wanted to be.
Hmm. So what did you apply in the house? Like, from watching them? Like, how did that affect how you were in the house?
So in terms of at home, that necessarily at home it didn't resonate because I was just so lost in finding myself. I was so lost in my father not being around and
Hmm.
no and this is the true conversation I think a lot of humans maybe don't have or understand or know how to frame it. But I was so lost in trying to find myself that I mean, whether doing the chores, taking out the trash, feeding the dog, but the really thing that all there was emptiness.
Right.
And so everything I played sports, and early on I got great grades, but it wasn't because it was just purely for the fact because I was trying to be seen, and so I knew I could get
Right.
attention from being a great. I had some natural skills as an athlete, and then education. I love to learn, but that was all because I went to bed every night feeling alone and feeling not good enough. And, I didn't know what that was then, but I just went to bed every night unhappy.
Well, and I think it's such an important thing to talk about, especially as a man, because I don't think men talk about these things. But even so I didn't see my father from the time I was 16 to 32. So
Mhm.
I understand something of how you feel from maybe a female perspective, but there's always been something in my head where there's people that are born to survive, and there's people that kind of fall into the pain of it and can't get themselves out of it and take other paths. And I like you was very focused on getting good grades. Like I was going to get better than this. I was going to make sure I still accomplished. And it was definitely like embedded in me to focus on that versus maybe the pain, when you go to bed at night. And I definitely can understand, that feeling from you. And it's like when you're doing well in sports, which sounds like you're getting those accolades that you need, right?
Yeah, and it was funny because even though I went to sports in school, that was I did definitely get in the spaces of finding my outlet, be in trouble.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let me not
Let's
say
be clear. Yeah.
yeah. Let me not say
Yeah.
and so I definitely found gave my mom a run for her money as far as getting phone calls
Right.
home and things like that. And so there was a destructive nature because I was angry.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a great conversation to have from a male perspective because, I didn't feel good enough and I couldn't have that conversation.
Right.
And I didn't know how to have that conversation. And so I was a depressed, my mom used to say like, you're a good kid. You got, you're a negative, you think negatively. And I thought the world was going to end. Everything was horrible. My life sucked. I tried to run away from home when I was 9. And so I did have an underlying, and I was very, to say where the line is, you become suicidal versus, just
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it. I thought it would have been better off me not being on this planet.
Mm.
And so I went through, and I was diagnosed officially as being depressed when I was 15. But these, finally sitting in someone's office saying, yeah, think about, death being better all the time.
Right.
That was just the opportunity I had at 15. That thought, since I was 5 years old, crying in my room,
Wow.
I was thinking about, and I used to scream, God, why you put me here? Why you do
Wow.
this to me?
Yeah.
And I just didn't know how to frame life. I didn't have any way to have that conversation articulated in the
Yeah.
dynamic I was in.
So how did that turn around for you?
The biggest thing for me, I went through my grandfather's band. I was raised in church,
Mm-hmm.
with a spiritual background. And then my grandfather, so I always had like, okay, if I could just get, if you're up there, if there's something out there, help me, right?
So you believed in a
And,
higher power.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I always felt there was just this drive. I was like, there was always something in me that felt greater.
Mm-hmm.
And so that got, I continued to go on my journey, but really the turnaround started when they diagnosed me as depressed. And, it was the first time they gave me a prescription, said, okay, this is going to help you. And I've always had this kind of fighter in me that got me in a lot of trouble. But I just, I just said, I don't want this, right? And I didn't know how to frame it. In that point, it was like, the devil or this, like it was an adversary. Let me put it this way, that there was this opportunity to be happy and something in me was pushing against that. And, I was in that mentality, like, I'm not going without a fight. And that's a big one of there was these big, how you going on a
Mm-hmm.
ride and you hear the click and you're going over the
Yeah.
top.
Right.
That was one of the big clicks in terms of mindfulness, where I started to see that there was something about life happening in my head. I didn't know how to quantify it, but that
Mm-hmm.
I had something, there was some way that I could start to grab my thinking and try to send it in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big click at 15 years old. And then luckily, I really started to get good at sports at the same time. So I found this like really deep, like, wow, maybe I could go somewhere. The first time I thought maybe football could take me somewhere. And
Right.
so it was kind of like that perfect storm that it really started to click my life in a different direction.
Yeah. And I think it's so important with kids is to find that thing that you're good at. Like everybody has a thing, whether it's sports or music or art or academics. Um, it's sometimes we push into things where we have an interest in, but that's not our natural thing. But
Hmm.
when we find that natural thing where it doesn't feel like work and it just works. Like you just have to keep seeking it, right? Like so that you can turn things around. And were you taking the prescription by that point?
No,
So you didn't take it.
I never took it.
Okay. So did you go to therapy to help you
So,
during this?
so I went. It was actually it got. It was a school counselor who we connected with, and so I ended up seeing her a couple times. But it's something that I just took it up on myself, and my mom had always told me like you're thinking like and so
Mm-hmm.
I knew. So I really took it on myself to start to try to figure this out on my own, and I've been that type to like
Right.
so I did go and see her and we talked about different things, and I didn't handle the issues with my dad because really the driving thing, and I don't want to say with my dad, with learning how to survive in a world knowing I was enough regardless if my dad had been there to say it or not, because it wasn't
Right.
him, it was in
Yes.
me. And so that still hadn't came to light, but I know if I could stop always just sitting there thinking all day how horrible my life was, and because I was good at sports, I could spend hours thinking about how to be better. And I got heavily into, weight training as well. So I almost filled my mind with stuff that allowed it to not be that idle mind that could be the devil's playground per
To
se.
what was good.
Yes.
Yeah. And then how did you do that? Did you journal? Did you take time aside to do that, like by yourself, or what kind of things were you doing to actually put that into practice? Because that's a way to train your brain, right? And you have to be consistent.
You know what? I took the book of because it's coming from the background I came from, the spiritual background and religion is like the book of Proverbs was like
Mm-hmm.
the book of wisdom. And so somebody had told me one time, well, there's 31 of them. You just read one a day and like apply it a day and change your life. And so that was like and that's where I started to get it. So I would just read one a day, and whatever it was, I just kind of be like, how did that apply to my life today? And I'm 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
And so I started to do little stuff like that. That just was these little habits that I didn't understand were starting to were grooming me
Yeah.
to retrain my brain.
Yeah. Is there one that stands out for you?
Oh man, the and this will tell you everything about me. I have it tattooed on my shoulder. The being that quits when his heart is weak, and that's Proverbs 31.
The being that quits in his heart is
Yeah,
weak.
so it says the man that quits when his heart is weak, basically,
Oh,
is what it says.
when it's
And
hard is weak.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so so that's something that always and excuse me, Proverbs 24 is what that is. But that was that, and that still is my mantra to today.
Yeah.
If you when it's hard is when you get to actually know who you are.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing about any mindset or self-help as you go through it. It's like at 15 you can start turning this around, feel better, and then an injury happened when you're 18, and then you got to then fall back on, okay, it's hard again. How am I going to get through this, rather than letting it cut you down?
Yes, and that's what and that's what all started to happen is that was just a platform to
Right.
set the foundation for everything that's happened. Let's say up until this morning, when it was hard this morning to do
Right.
maybe a small thing, and it's the onion effect. It'll
Right.
always be a new layer.
So you played football in high school, and then how did you end up in arena football?
Yeah, so I played football at UNLV. I was a nose guard there.
Mm-hmm.
Once I graduated, the transition NFL or Division One or just college in general to NFL, you start to work out for NFL teams. And one of the NFL teams told me, "Hey, we really like my position I was at in college. It was going to be a really, really long shot for me to have an opportunity." And so one of the NFL teams, the coach, the scout said, "Hey, look, I like the way you look today. I think you should lose some weight. You got some speed, some agility, and see if you can maybe transition to a different position." And so as that happened, it was a journey of, okay, I'm going to need to, develop these skills. So arena was the next step to be able to have an opportunity to develop at that position. So that's where my career went from
So
college
how
to
did that
arena.
feel? So this is a goal you had to make it to the NFL, I'm assuming. So
Yes.
how did that feel to get that news and have to pivot?
So to get the new then pivot, so I had trained up until that point. The development had continued, so it was just now it's hard. So if I quit
Right.
now, and that like
Right.
now this is where I separate myself.
Right.
And so it was not being able to get lost in a thought. It was just like, okay, this is the next step, and really believing that, hey, I can make this happen if I press hard enough. So to get the news, it was discouraging. My college coach, one of my college coaches told me something at my exit interview. He said, some people, he asked me what was next. I said, well, I want to keep going on and really work hard and see how far I could go. And he said, some people need to know when to quit. And that right there was like, it was like, that was my mental meat, as one of my athletes I train would say. And it was not me.
It was your mental meat, is that
Yeah.
what you said?
That I needed that, like, he necessarily wasn't he didn't coach the most encouraging, but
Right.
even if I quit the next week, I wasn't going to quit that day after he told me, so that
Right.
he'd be the one to be the callous of that. So that was what I needed. And I just shifted focus and I lasered in on a goal. And every day I was going to wake up and get one step closer through effort to getting to that goal if I could.
So what was your degree in college?
My degree in interdisciplinary social science.
Okay. What does that mean?
So great. So the focus was sociology, but with this degree, you could actually kind of pivot it into, you could take more classes and kind of round it out. So I was able to take more of a focus in individual psychology along with
Okay.
sociology and bring in some philosophy and some religion. So all the things I was actually passionate about,
Yeah.
I was able to put together, and that degree contained all of those.
So what was your journey then with arena football and to where you are today?
So I spent 2 years in arena football, and had a lot of fun there, learned a lot about myself, did a lot of great things. And what was awesome, arena is a very aggressive, violent sport, and just football in general, of course. But in arena, I was a linebacker there. And so I started to get a lot of concussions, very
Mm,
just blunt style training. And so after my second year, had to make the decision, is the reward worth the cost? Because
right.
after that year, I really started to notice, I'm looking to put a sentence together, necessarily may not flow as much. And so that kind of like, and that was right on the cusp of all of the concussion, stuff that came up and really became on the forefront. So it was just before that. So it wasn't really talked about or big yet. So I decided to go into boxing after that. I was like, okay, so this is my theory. Football may be crazy, but I had an opportunity. There was this great new
And no
ground.
one gets punched in the head in boxing.
No one, right? So this is my theory. I'm not completely crazy here. So my theory was this: football, we're going to destroy our frontal lobe because we're smashing
Right.
head on. Boxing is when boxers get the brain damage. That's what they call punch drunk, and it's like a spider web, so it's all over their head. And you really don't see a punch drunk boxer unless they've made it a career over their whole lifetime. So I'm like, I'm only going to be there for a little bit. My front, like, okay, I won't be completely smashed my front. The rest of my brain is good to
It'll
go.
even out. Yeah.
Well, I'm like, it's a Bentley everywhere else. So I was
Right.
just, so it's good to go. It's war torn. But inside of that, I started to go into boxing. I did that for a while. And then I found out I had holes in my retinas, from all the head collisions and brain
Wow.
jarring. And so after that, that's when I actually exited sports, combat sports, collision sports on the competitive side.
Got it. So then so now you're back into the hard. So where did your path go?
Yeah, so I got into sports management. On that side, I started a recruiting company for the company I actually was boxing for. They were, a very new company, and they didn't have some system in place to, recruit athletes and things. And that had been my world. I had pretty much got myself recruited into college. I worked that whole process in a letter. I just knew that system. So I started a company called Athletes Opportunity, which was a recruiting company and specifically tailored for that company I was actually boxing for. Over time, I ended up becoming very successful with that recruiting. They brought me in-house, and I ended up, working my way up and becoming a general manager there, and really starting to learn the sports side of business, or the business side of sports, I should say. And I realized that wasn't for me. And through that, I had lost my weight, and I had completely went on this inner transformational. So I'm not the athlete at the end of my career that got that scholarship.
Right.
And so then I realized how much my passion was in the physical transformation space. And now mindfulness was at the forefront of what the opportunities available when you connect the two, for people to have more than just having a new waistline, but having a new life outlook. And that's my passion to this day and probably forever.
So what were you doing as far as mindfulness training?
So at that point, I had got into, I had got introduced to sports psychology and, imagery and visualization, and all of that aspect of, whether it's positive role play in the mind and kind of, starting to neurologically create those new patterns of, within the brain. And so I got into that. So fast forward, when I transformed, and this is the human journey, I'll call it, versus just sports, is when I transformed. I used to always have I was always self-conscious. I don't look good enough, and I love to be honest and just really be, completely authentic with my human experience. I was a great athlete and things like that. I'd wake up every day and I'd be like, I'm not ugly, or I'm ugly. I don't look good enough. I'm not attractive, like all of this different stuff and that was only one of the limiting beliefs. And so, but it was always, cause I was the big guy and I was overweight and like, but it really wasn't that. It was such a deeper thing. But so I lose 100. At that point, I had lost 60 pounds. I went from a lineman to a linebacker, and now, and just, so now I'm a jacked football player, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I'm still in Vegas, and I walk out to the library, and this young lady stops me and she's like, wow, you look amazing. Couldn't look her in the eye, and I couldn't let that land. And I walked away, I said, thank you. I walked away, and it was everything I thought I was going to be on the other side of the physique. It's like when you get everything you thought you wanted, I was still me.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, there's some stuff I got to figure out who I am. And that started to take the deeper conversation of like, not how do I relate to the world, but how do I relate to me? And so that journey went on, and of course it still goes on to the day of deciding, truth versus, these inner conversations, these patterns and blueprints that are a sounding board that I no longer am interested in.
Right. You're like, this is getting old. Yeah. Well, we always talk about that in yoga, just like, would you be best friends with yourself if you really pay attention to the things you're saying to yourself, right?
Right. Like somebody turn off that mic. Who has that box over there?
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think it's true, whether you're in sports or business, so many people limit themselves in their careers as well, because they think they might not be good enough, or even though they're being told they are, whatever messages are going on in someone's head is limiting them based on their own, this stems back to your father not being around when you're a little boy, right? And even though you have tons of examples of good men in your life, that doesn't matter. It's not your father, right? At the end of the day. And so all these things that we carry with us, no one sees from the outside. And it's very hard to break why someone isn't taking on an opportunity, or why they can't break past their own limitation a lot of times. So how do you help people with that?
Well, and I'll say I love to, because as I started the story, I like to say the pillow talk. We'll get to a level of conversation, but how do you talk to yourself before bed? That pillow talk of truth that, and so with me, I love it because this is my thing, and my athletes know, is I say, let me work out with you for 30 minutes. Don't tell me anything about you, and you'll tell me all about your life. I'll know everything about you in 30 minutes of a hard workout, everything. Right. And so what I love is I learned that about myself. I learned, how much, let's say, I was going for a run, and, it was a longer distance run than I ever ran. All the doubt that starts to surface. Right. And can you really do it? And all this. So that's inside of because to answer your question, the way to move past that is to become aware of it.
Hmm.
And one of the biggest things is why what hampers performance is the lack of awareness around the inner conversations that are creating the auto response.
Right.
So, it's like that glass ceiling or that fake ceiling, right? Where I always stumble. I think the Big Leap, called it, I don't know if you ever read that book, but they call it in the Big Leap. It's called the upper limit in the
Hmm.
big leap. You hit your upper limit, you start doing the same thing, right?
Right.
And that'll bring you back down to that comfort zone, or that paradigm belief. And so once you're aware of it, you can actually make the choice to say, is this true? Is this not
Hmm.
true? And can I move forward? Like, so for instance, I get to it to make a decision and it says, oh yeah, I don't think you could do that. I don't know if I'm good enough. Is this true? Well, I've proven, like you said, I have a body of sports performance that say I am good enough. Okay, so this is not true. And then if the awareness, well, where did that come from? Well, that time I didn't get picked first on the playground, I decided I wasn't good enough to play with everybody else. And it's something that seems so trivial, but it has been many people who had the greatest abilities ever, who a situation like that stopped them at being, let's just say, a manager when they could have been a CEO.
Right.
And so I think that awareness is the number one thing that allows that. And when I'm training my athletes, that's the number one thing we focus on. So if
Hmm.
something comes up, if we're doing a heavy set or we're finishing up, and I notice a cue or something, I'll immediately say, hey, what's that? We're like, what came up right there? What were you thinking? And it'll be an opportunity for them to say, hey, this is what it was, and we may go into that in the space, or just bring the awareness, and they come back a couple weeks later and say, you asked me, like, what I got scared about there. And I noticed that I saw that in three different areas, because the brain only knows effort or situation.
Right.
It doesn't say, hey, you're in the gym, you're good here,
Right.
at home with the husband, you're not good there. It only
Yeah.
knows
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So then once you become aware of it, you see how it's starting to play out, and you can powerfully choose.
Yeah. So how have you seen the benefits with people that you work with on this?
Oh, I mean, I think this is the number one focus with my athletes. But in terms of the benefit I've seen, let's start, because I specialize in working with women 48 and over who are at this very powerful transitionary position in life, where, maybe the kids are out the house and they're empty nest, or they've conquered career, and it's kind of, they've reached a level where they can start to really focus on other things. And giving, as we're going for these wellness and these fitness goals, to see how did that play into your eating, because
Hmm.
it's everywhere. And then so we've seen a tremendous results in terms of the athletes I've worked with, in terms of transformation, if there was some mindfulness thing in place, but then also in their lives, their feedback in terms of opportunity or different ways they approach life, and just every aspect of their life, from hitting the highest number of sales in their businesses. And these are some very high powered women that I work with, to, taking new opportunities, or realizing that I was going to stay here another, 5 years, but I'm actually, I got a year left in me, and those other four were going to be because it was safe.
Right.
It's time for me to transition. So it's been great results with athletes.
Yeah. And I think it's an important point of, when something comes up for us in one place, it's usually affecting us in a bunch of different aspects of our lives. And it's important to notice, like, I mean, sometimes I use the example, like, you can be in a bad mood and all day long, like, you're getting in fights with people, like the grocery checkout person, and, just random things. And you come home and you're just like, I can't believe this person and that person. Then you're like, wait, I'm the common denominator in my day.
Right.
And really trying to understand, like, why those things are happening. And in yoga we use the example a lot, like, it takes a lot of courage to get on your mat because you're alone with yourself and you're alone with your mind, and that's sometimes the hardest thing for people to do, is come into the self-awareness, not the blame of outside circumstances, right?
Yes. It's usually the hardest, but the most powerful.
Right. Yes.
It's like we can, and I could have done so many outward things to change, but I call it my distance runs. I put on a weighted vest, and I'll go for a distance run, and in that run, it's me, and boy, are we going to have some time to kill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to battle this thing out.
Yes, for sure. And so, but on the other side of, the level of freedom that I feel, and every moment, and every, theoretical drop of sweat in terms of transforming and digging to find out who I really am has been worth it for this lifetime and many more if I get to take it with me.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story like you have and so authentically. I'd like to end with some rapid fire questions. So you pick a category.
Great.
So the category is either family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Woo. Oh man, all of those together. Let's go. Let's go spiritual.
Okay, good one. I don't have many people choose that. So awesome. Things or actions that I don't have that I want.
Things are actions that I don't have that I want. Spiritual, in that category. Things and action that I mindful, being able to just be still throughout the day.
Yeah.
And that is something that I really want to just be able to lose myself in a moment.
Yeah. Awesome. Things or actions that I do have that I want as far as spirituality.
Things and actions that I do have that I want. So what I do have in spirit, intuition. I've won in my life because everything may say go left. When my gut speaks, I learned that is going to be the right outcome. Yeah. And it's bulletproof.
And when you go against it, you'll always get to the same result. Yeah. Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want as far as spirituality.
Things and action that I don't have that I don't want. That's hard. There's onion, there's layers, right? So there may be, I may have lowered the water line to like 1 foot of water, but there's still like, that little monster still goes, you're going to die if you take that risk. And I go, so I'm going to say that and hold myself accountable and say, I have not yet reached that. If there is the end, I haven't reached it yet. So everything is still under development. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's good. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want as far as my spirituality.
Ooh, things I have things because I could be sitting here in Nirvana right now and I'm still out chasing it.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
It comes back to being present and still and just being okay with the now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, great. So this has been a great conversation. Is there anything you want to make sure that we haven't talked about that people come away with today from our conversation?
The number one thing my biggest, yes, and I will say this, is that that underneath all of the things that stop you, you are actually only comprised of all of the things that have ever made you get there. And anything that would limit that is actually what gets to be removed. But everything that moves you is the essence of life. And that's what we're all driving with.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think your story will help so many and also make a lot of people not feel so alone, right? And theirs. So thank you.
We are in it together.
Yeah.
It has been a pleasure, Amy. I'm so grateful that you allowed me to be a part of this experience with you today. Such a powerful, podcast and all of the gifts you give through this vehicle of your expression, which I know and, honoring the multiple ways you crush it. But that you give this gift for people to know that they have those tools and abilities in them is awesome.
Well, thank you. All right. Thank you very much. And now for our mindful moments with this episode with Joseph. That was a very vulnerable and authentic interview, I thought, that he was so open about his feelings and about his story. And I hope that it will help so many of you out there to hear his story and see how he conquered his own beliefs to be able to transform his life and help others. So really starting back into this whole concept of being the man of the house, I thought was kind of an interesting thing, even as a little boy, and how that affects what the kind of pressure you put on yourself and how others see you as a man. I think it's something to think about, whether you're parents or you're thinking about your own upbringing and you're a man listening to this, of the kind of pressure to not have weakness and to protect others, when sometimes that you feel you need the protection, you need the emotion, you need the compassion that maybe others aren't seeing you as, especially as a man, because others look to a man many times for that same sort of protection and care as well. And I think that openness of talking about that, or being aware of that for yourselves, of what do I need, is a really important question to ask yourself, and maybe evaluate how over time, by having that awareness of where you began, what other people maybe put on you or pressure to be a certain thing. I've heard other men also talk about this in their careers, that there's a lot of talk all the time about women being home or having flexible schedules, but men didn't feel like they could ask for that. And there's still may be many organizations where men feel like that would be a career limiting thing, making sure that they're home on time for kids' games and practices, or being there at dinner time, because they're afraid of how others will look at them, or maybe it will affect their success. What we need to understand is when we live true to ourselves, and we're more aware of how we start pleasing others versus what we need, that example of actually making sure that we are fulfilling our own passions, but also being able to be compassionate to ourselves and our own needs, and vulnerable to feelings that we have, that we don't have to put this guard rail up, this wall up, with people, that we don't have emotion, that we don't have needs from other people. That example, when we show that we do have those needs, actually permeates and has a bigger effect on the people around us when we are more ourselves and open and honest about what we need. And I think Joseph in this interview really did that for us, that he, by all aesthetic and looking at Joseph, he's, definitely athletic and has a very masculine look to him, and the way that he's led his life. But his vulnerability of what he went through and how much his self-doubt affected him was a really important conversation to have. And it was really important for him to be so open and honest about it as well, so other men and women could see that it's okay to be truthful about our experiences, because it only brings us closer to one another when we do share those experiences, because all of us have something. And his point about really assessing those thoughts that go through your head and understanding whether they are true. Is it the truth? Or is it something that we're creating within ourselves based on whatever experience that we have that really no one else sees, that no one else thinks of us, and we're just creating that as a story in our head? So that mindset that's so important to wake up with every day and put the practices in place, whether that's meditation, whether that's mantras, whether that's exercise, whether that's taking pictures, going for a walk, whatever it is, to clear our minds, be aware of what's going on internally for us, so that we can make sure that we're putting out the energy that we want, that we are feeling intentionally the way that we want, and make sure that we know that this is a journey, right? This path of awareness is always a journey. It's always learning. We never get to a point where we just know everything about ourselves. That there's always a point where There's a new aha moment, and sometimes that happens daily, sometimes that happens weekly. But that awareness, when it comes up, it's hard, but that's where the learning happens, and that is where the growth happens in our lives. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.